I'm meeting more priests who describe themselves as Tradismatics, or sometimes as Trentacostals.
Alright everyone, JR from HolyFaith Media back here again for Catholic in a Car. And in today's video, I want to do a video response to Father Mark Goring's Tradismatics and Trentacostals. Let me start off by saying that I have a tremendous amount of respect for Father Mark Goring. I watch him probably more than I watch anybody else on YouTube. I think he's a very devout priest, a sincere priest, and an amazing transmitter of the Catholic faith. Probably more effective than just about anyone else that I've watched on social media. However, his recent video where he's talking about these people that identify as Tradismatics and Trentacostals. First off, I thought that when I saw the title, before I started watching, I thought he was going to be talking about schismatic traditionalists. And I was surprised that that's not what he was talking about. When he was going into the subject, what he was talking about is people that he has met over time that identify as charismatics, but maybe go to the traditional Latin Mass. But I have to question, has Father Goring actually met these people, or is he just reading about them, or what is it? Because I can tell you, I've been to FSSP parishes, several SSPX ones, diocesan Latin Masses, all over Ontario, Eastern Canada, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and I've yet to come across any of these people that he's talking about that call themselves Tradismatics. Now, I understand that Father Goring was, at least, I don't know if he's still involved with it, but at one time was involved in the charismatic movement. And I do have some experience in the charismatic movement myself. When I first became a Catholic, I somewhat came into the faith through people that were in the charismatic movement. And I must say, they were very devout people, very sincere, and they believe in the Catholic faith, unparalleled in many cases. However, there's always something off with them, and I'll give you an example of one of these first meetings I went to with a good friend of mine. We went to this meeting, and the lady was telling me, she said, oh, well, you know, I was telling her that I was a Protestant convert, and she's like, well, so am I. And I said, oh, you converted too? And she's like, no, I'm still a Protestant. She's like, but I'm a charismatic Pentecostal. Or a Catholic Pentecostal, I think is the term that she used. Now that struck me as odd, as somebody that was learning about the Catholic faith and, you know, learning from people that were more on the traditional end of the spectrum, to say that you're still a Protestant and you're also a Catholic at the same time. It struck me as odd, but whatever. Well, anyway, so the meeting starts, and then next thing you know, this Pentecostal minister, and not even a Trinitarian Pentecostal minister, but one from the United Pentecostal Church. I assume you guys have that denomination in the United States. He comes in, and these people don't even believe in the Trinity, one of the most basic doctrines of the Catholic faith that almost all Christians universally agree on is the Holy Trinity. Well, the UPC, those types of Pentecostals, they don't believe in that. And that's who they have speaking. And now, I don't think he was a regular there, but in any case, they invited him in to give a talk on, you know, life in the spirit or whatever it was. Somebody that doesn't even believe, a heretic that doesn't even believe in the Holy Trinity. That's who's leading this, okay? Fast forward a few years, and I went to another Life in the Spirit seminar. My experience there, it's almost kind of laughable, because I remember there was this lady that was leading it, or she was one of the prayer leaders, and she was praying over me, and she's like, you know, she was basically pushing me to like speak in tongues or whatever it was, because there's a few other people there that were speaking in tongues. And, you know, I always found it funny that as soon as the leader starts speaking in tongues, well, next thing you know, they're all speaking in so-called tongues. Anyway, she's like, you don't feel anything? And I'm like, no, not really. And she's like, well, you know, you're not open to the Spirit, or you have something that's holding you back from speaking in tongues. And I said, okay, well, I mean, if that's what you think, but I genuinely don't feel anything other than my normal piety or devotion. Like, you know, so you could see how this person was egging me on to and I think that's a lot of times that's what this charismatic stuff is just a groupthink where, you know, because this one person says, well, you have to talk in this silly babble while everybody else has to, you know, sure enough, they follow along. And I find a lot of it to be silly emotionalism. And I say that with all due respect to the people that go to the charismatic movement. But I think if you're being honest with yourself, okay, a lot of it is silly emotionalism. Now, I don't deny that there are genuine gifts of the Spirit, but I don't believe that speaking in some unknown babble, especially when you don't even have interpreters around, has anything to do with the Holy Spirit. A god of confusion is what that is. But getting back to the subject, a Tradismatic and a Trentacostal, I know that one of these guys that I met at a Life in the Spirit seminar, the guy's name is Michael. This is where I met him, is the Life in the Spirit, and he was somewhat heavily involved in these charismatic movements, and he was also an altar server. And I think around the same time that we met, he also was kind of discovering the traditional Latin Mass, and eventually he became an altar server for the traditional Latin Mass. And I noticed that as he became more involved in the traditional Mass and learning the traditional practices of the church, he moved away from the charismatic movement. He wanted less and less to do with it, and to the point that I haven't talked to him for a few years, but if you were to talk to him today, he probably would tell you that he wants nothing to do with charismatic so-called Catholicism, okay? There's a lot of bad things that I see there, and you know, my examples I think are just one of many. I've heard of other people that, you know, they go to these mixed interdenominational prayer meetings thinking that, you know, everybody there has the Spirit, and what that ends up doing is denying some of the basic truths of our Catholic faith, that we all receive the Holy Spirit when we're baptized, and again in confirmation, or chrismation, as the Easterners call it. This idea that there's more of an opening by having somebody pray over you with hands, I don't know, it just always struck me as suspect. I don't doubt that there's some devout, sincere people involved in it. And in fact, actually, now that I think of it, one of the priests who I relied on a lot to go to confession, that's in the Buffalo Diocese, he actually was involved in this charismatic movement. And I found him to be an extremely good confessor. He didn't say the traditional Latin Mass. He was as Novus Ordo as they come, but there was something special about him whenever I would go to confession, and that's why I would seek him out and go to confession to him. And he was in the charismatic movement, okay? So I'm not biased in that sense. It's just that there's something seriously wrong from a theological standpoint with the charismatic movement. And when you look at the origins, okay? When you look at the origins of this movement, how it started with, in the early 1900s with these groups of Protestants. I think the guy's name was Charles Fox Parham. And then later, after the Second Vatican Council, it was this group of college students at, I think it was Marquette University, if I'm not wrong, who all of a sudden went to one of these mixed denominational prayer meetings, and they all of a sudden had the Holy Spirit, and next thing you know, well, they needed to spread it to all the Catholics. And that's how it became a thing in the Catholic Church. And I just find the origins of it very suspect. It's divorced in most senses from the traditional Catholic faith and traditional practices. I can't find any of the saints who participated in these, you know, mass groups where they're all speaking in some unknown babble. I can't find it. If somebody can find it for me, I know that there's charismatics that supposedly say that this existed somewhere in the early church. I'd love for them to point it out, because I've never seen it. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and that's all for now.